Good
evening. We will now call the special call board meeting for the Beaufort County Board of Education to order. It is February 8th, 2021. The meeting is being conducted via hybrid video conferencing, and the meeting is also being live streamed on the county channel YouTube station. We now need a motion to approve the agenda.
I'm going to special call.
All right, Mr. Mel Campbell made the motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Second by Ingrid Boatwright. Any discussion? Okay, board docs is now open.
Robine, yes. I have to refresh.
Mr. Stribinger,
Yes. I'm gonna do it.
Ms. Middleton,
I vote yes.
Mr. Smith. Is he present?
There's somebody on an iPhone.
Sounds ominous.
The person that's listed as an iPhone participant, please identify themselves.
You want me to close the vote?
Yes, please. The agenda is approved 10-0-0, one vote not cast. The vote not cast was Mr. William Smith. We will now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With liberty and justice for all.
The media was properly notified. Could the person on the iPhone please identify themselves?
This is Dr. Rodriguez on the iPhone.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. All right. We will now review the board's self-evaluation results, and the ad hoc committee chairman is Mr. Mel Campbell, so I'll let him lead the discussion, and Mel, I'll pay attention to the raised hands and all that kind of thing. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Back in September, the chair selected this committee to review and develop a tool for the board to utilize as a self-evaluating tool. It evolved from one of our policy criteria that stated that the board should utilize the evaluation tool, I think on a yearly basis. I'll try to find that and read it, got it somewhere. Right now, it's policy 2.1, soon to be changed to GC 3.6, I believe. But it reads, ensure acceptable board performance through annual self-evaluation. That was the directive that created the need for our committee. We've embarked on pursuing that goal, utilizing some tools that were previously used by other boards of the area, and a tool that came from the South Carolina School Board Association. There are 4 members of our committee: Fisher Frederick, Will Smith, and a member that's no longer with us, Joanne Orshak, along with myself. And I was selected chair of that committee. So we first tried to get a grip on what we were supposed to do. And one of the first suggestions during meeting 1 was to have each board member submit a statement stating what they thought was an effective school board. So we got responses from, I think, 9 board members. And I don't have that document before, but they submitted a number of different opinions, but for the most part, narrowed down into some basic stuff like results and policies, structure, public meetings, etc. And that's primarily what I thought was the focus that we needed to examine. But looking at all of the possible questions, we had to decide what questions to use to develop this tool. So we went to a series of meetings developing questions and ended up with 91 multiple choice style questions. I don't know what you call it, response, degree responses, I guess. 5 to 1. And 5, you thought it happened all the time, or 1 thought it really never happened. And out of those 91 questions, I think we'll show you some of those. They're on the board now. Those are some of the questions there. And we actually had a selective tool of, I guess, probably 200 questions that we narrowed down to 91. Going through each one of them, vetting them in terms of whether or not it was applicable to our goal. At the end of vetting those questions, we decided that the other part would be a free response part, which we would ask the board to submit questions in terms of 9 free response questions. That was like part 2. So the board was given this trial evaluation, I think in December to submit, or November, to submit back to us in December as a practice test. We called it. I think when we voted on it, we voted to utilize it as a board evaluation tool, but with corrective measures being possible. So today we're going to look at what the responses were from those 91 questions and the free responses, and try to see how we can improve this tool, 1, but also see how the board measures up within themselves, how we graded ourselves, how we evaluated ourselves, and where we are today or where we have been over the last year or multiple number 2 years been on the board. So we only evaluated from what we know. So that's the backdrop. Are there any questions about the backdrop, why we are here?
No, sorry. No questions. Thank you for the excellent summary.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna start with the last first. That is correct, right, Tricia?
Do that.
Good.
Okay.
Which is the free response questions and Ms. Frederick have presented a very colorful and formative PowerPoint for us to look at and decide what, what we've said, what we've all said about the board in terms of free responses and where we need to be.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. So part 2 of the self-evaluation instrument was really comprised of 3 different sections. The first section said, what are the 3 most important issues the board will face in the next year? And board members were asked to answer the top 3. The second question were the strengths of the board, and then the third question was the weaknesses, and then any additional comments. I think it's important to note that when you look at the responses, I did not do an analysis necessarily, I did a compilation. Okay, the analysis is for us to do here as a group. Okay, what is it saying to us? What does it mean? I also think it's important to note that not everybody participated. There were 11 board members, but you will not see that there were 11 responses. There were 2 board members that chose not to participate in the self-evaluation. All right, so thank you, Molly. Put it in a PowerPoint so it would be easy to read. And like many people do, start out with a quote. And I just thought this by Mark Twain was very important, that his point is that continuous improvement is important. You continually try to get better, you analyze yourself, you evaluate how you've done, and then you keep moving toward that perfection. Instead of doing nothing and trying to just all of a sudden say we're perfect, okay? We know we're not perfect. We know the board has had its challenges, and that is what we're trying to look at today through some honest conversation and some open eyes. What are some of our challenges and the efficacy of this board? So the first question specifically said, what are the 3 most important issues the board will face in the next year? List in priority order, with 1 being the most important. Okay? I'm not going to read this out loud to everybody, or perhaps I should for the public. Perhaps I should, okay, because it might be difficult to read. So the most important issues, the highest priority, these are the responses that I received. And basically, also, just so everybody know that all the responses were sent to Robin Cushenberry, okay? And then she sent the 3 responses to myself, but they had no names on it. So I have no idea who these answers are from which board member.
Can I say one other thing too? You and Mel both said this, I just want the public to know this.
Okay.
That really this evaluation is based on the last 2 years, since most of the board members are new in the last 2 years. However, as you pointed out, 2 board members chose not to participate at all. And our 2 newest board members that joined us in January would not have had the opportunity to participate, because this was done back in December, but we're finally compiled the results that are presented. I just want to make that very clear to the public.
Right, thank you very much. That's very important. And so, Ms. Boatwright, Ms. Middleton, your new eyes at this information, your analysis of it will be very crucial for us. Okay, so some of the responses, all of the responses actually, the highest priority is unknown budgets and revenues, remediating the achievement, educational loss due to COVID-19, compensating for the revenue shortfall caused by the pandemic. The achievement gap was noted by 2 members as being the highest priority. Ensuring support necessary to provide quality education to all students, whether in person or virtual. Coping with the pandemic, and retaining teachers and teacher pay.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Campbell, would you want to go through it in its entirety or are questions after each slide? Any questions or comments?
Well, I would, some take questions as they apply.
Yeah. Okay, so let me know. Okay. All right, so what I did with that one is I took everybody's responses and just took the highest priority from each one. So this was what people said the second highest priority for our school district is student achievement. What is the new normal once school resumes? What changes will and should remain as a new norm? Strategy to recover academically from the pandemic effect on student performance. Graduation rate and the effect the pandemic may have had on it or will have on it. Ensuring financials are frequently monitored and conservatively utilized during a time of possible budget constraints due to COVID. Equity and education opportunities across all district schools. Eliminate the achievement gap, COVID-19, and safety. And the third highest priority, again, achievement gap, increasing educational funding, effects of ongoing pandemic, retention of teachers and building teacher capacity, 2 people answered that, revenue decrease concerns, students receiving appropriate remediation during and post-COVID, and learning how to be an effective board. You'll notice that there are some common themes in those highest priorities. So what I did was I took the words, and there are some fabulous on-site tools. And this is like a Wordle. I didn't actually use Wordle, but it's like a Wordle. And it's just a visual to show when these words showed up, like the ones that are in the largest font, are the ones that showed up more often in the responses. So it's just a visual way for everybody to say, okay, so what were some of the overlapping concerns enumerated by all the board members? And you can see achievement and pandemic are the biggest. COVID, the gap, teachers, education. So just a visual way to really summarize what some of the key concerns are of those highest priorities. So are there any thoughts or questions on this first section of part 2?
Well, I think you've given a good summary right there.
I know, it helps, doesn't it? Instead of just looking at all the words.
So word thing, summarize it, what else we could have possibly gathered.
Absolutely.
So Kathy Robart?
Yeah, I just want to clarify something. So when you say the highest priority, the second highest priority, and the third highest priority, I mean, achievement gaps on all of these. So is that the way that people listed them, like number 1, number 2, number 3?
So the highest priority, what I did is that whatever we, can go back to slide number 1. Okay, so these were all the answers from their number 1 answers. Okay, so what, 9.
So that's, okay,
So for each board member, this is what each one of those bullets is what they said was their highest priority. Am I not understanding your
Okay.
question?
well, I guess I didn't recall the way that the question was answered. So it asked us to list what our first priority, second, and third priority, is that correct?
Yes, I did. Kathy had said list in priority order with 1 being the most important.
Okay,
So
all right, then, Yep.
everybody's number 1s.
got it. Okay,
Okay, the next
thanks.
slide is everybody's number 2s.
Okay,
Okay, and then the next slide is everybody's number 3s. But you'll see how they were kind of jumbled up. One person's number 1 was achievement and another person's number 3 was achievement because their number 1 was pandemic. So there were
Right.
some common themes. So when you go to the word jumble, you'll see those that were common amongst all three of the prioritizations.
Thank you.
No, thank you for that clarifying question. Okay, and so then I just decided just to play around a bit and really what are the common words and the most important issues? So again, you see there in green, we saw a pandemic or COVID-19 took up the largest part of that pie chart. I didn't get into all the percentages and everything. This is just a very simple visual. Teachers and achievement gap. So these words just popped out as everybody's highest priorities. Okay, the next section, I did it the same way because it did say list and order with one being the most important. So what do you consider to be the 3 strengths of the board as a whole? In other words, what does the board have going for it? So again, I went through and these are everybody's #1 priority for the board's strengths. A broad diversity of board members' backgrounds and experiences, 5 people, okay, mentioned that. A fervent desire felt by board members for students to achieve, teachers and staff to feel valued, and to be good stewards of the trust our constituents have placed in us. 100% of board membership recognizes the importance of eliminating the achievement gap, and 3 members with teaching experience. So these were the #1 answers to the respondents in order of priority. So what was the second most important for board strengths? 2 members with large-scale corporate experience, a will to avoid previous board missteps or mistakes, a common desire to follow FOIA requirements, a sincere desire to improve board functioning and the district performance, 82% returning board members, a focus on improving student achievement outcomes. With a new board coming on the new year, I believe that would be something good, and governance opportunities and resources. And lastly, for what the board members felt were the third in priority for its board strength is community resources, working together going forward, a growth mindset, diverse backgrounds and experiences of board members, independent thinkers. All members recognize and value the importance of our teachers and recognize our need to retain them. A focus on policy to align with goals and district needs. And all members want what is best for the district. And so again, just doing a little word jumble, you can see what really sticks out is the backgrounds and experiences as a strength of the board. Members themselves, the diverse board. Those words play prominently in all the responses. And then board weaknesses. The question actually said, what do you consider 3 weaknesses of the board? What are the things the board as a whole need to improve? List in priority order with 1 being the most important. So this again is everybody's #1. Focus on board goals. Self-discipline is needed by all members for board to function at its best. Negative board culture, lack of trust amongst members. Perception of in-depth discussions as off-topic, no respect for the gavel. Lack of experience in high-level management. To improve its commitment to listen to each other respectfully, consider, appreciate, and respect each other's points of view. And the ×2 means that 2 members said that. The second highest priority of area to improve or seen as board weakness is function as a cohesive board. Board members need to remain consistent and supportive of the will of the board. Come to meetings prepared. Improve communication from board leadership. Lengthy meetings and personality differences lead to inefficient conversations. Lack of trust by some members toward the superintendent and staff. Must utilize data, best practices, research-based programs to determine policies and practices. And the third area to improve, or as noted as a board weakness, increase community involvement and engagement, proactive public engagement. 2 members stated that. Eliminate personal agendas. Some members are in constant contact with a few citizens of their choosing during the meetings, which is inappropriate and inequitable for the public at large. It also interferes with the decision-making authority bestowed upon the board as a whole. Listen more, pay attention, and don't ask questions that have already been answered. Focus on goals. Lack of experience on a well-functioning board of trustees. Angela Middleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a quick question about the lack of experience in high-level management. Can you explain that one?
I would have to ask the person that, or someone to explain it. I mean, I seriously took the words from the paper.
Okay.
I didn't try to, try to summarize or make inference as to what someone might want to be saying. So I don't know if someone would like to address that.
I'd like to address that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Guy.
Yeah, one of the weaknesses is that a lot of people don't have experience with a $250 million a year budget and $750 million worth of capital assets. And we often find ourselves spending, for example, we spend about an hour trying to decide how to spend $15,000 for a forensic audit. $15,000. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. I'm not saying it's not. But is it worth an hour of our time? And that's one of the differences I see with board members that think that a school board of this size and complexity is so simple that you can manage it like you would manage a family store. You can't. That's why we have staff, that's why we have a superintendent, and our focus should be on the forest, not the trees or the weeds between the trees, but the forest. And oftentimes, because of the lack of understanding of scope, we get into the weeds. And we, that's our superintendent's function. Our function is to look at the forest and then see some trees there. Not so right when we said to the forest meister, our superintendent, what's going on with those trees over there? But not down what's in the weeds. So I put that down as one of the weaknesses. So I just wanted to explain why.
Thank you.
So Angela, can you please lower your hand?
Oh.
Thank you. And then to that point then, again, if you take a look at this word jumble here, you'll see that the word lack is quite evident. And that the word lack of experience or lack of listening or lack of focusing on goals is playing very prominently in in an area of weakness perceived by board members of itself. So I thought this particular word jumble, Molly, just one second. I thought this really summarized the narrative quite well. Any other questions, Dr. Rhodes? No. Okay. All right. So the next part. Oh, I did move it. Thank you. Were just some additional comments
all right, that were at the bottom. And I believe most of these were comments about the instrument itself. And I just want to reiterate that one of the ad hoc self-evaluation committee's goals for this evening is to say, okay, you know, this is part of our policies to have this every year. We know this instrument was a beginning instrument. It was a first time since the board had not ever done a self-evaluation that we were able to find or to use as far as an instrument. So some of these comments here were about the instrument. Had difficulty answering some questions like, are all members prepared? And yeah, that would be difficult because that's an individual thing, but, and we know that there were several questions that might have been difficult to answer, and Mr. Campbell is going to go into some of those later when he goes over the charts, but they're still kind of important. So what's your perception? Are all members prepared? Redundant questions and loaded questions. Okay, so that's good feedback about the instrument. And then an additional comment, board meetings are the worst times in my current life. I've yet to leave a board meeting in a good mood. Some members of the board cannot control themselves emotionally. Some board members have no respect for the authority given to the board chair. So the additional comments, there were no parameters put on it. You could write down whatever you wanted to write regarding, you know, the board itself or the instrument itself. So, Mr. Campbell, I believe that concludes the presentation of the three response.
Any further questions or comments about free response? I think the questions that we had were very appropriate, and some of the additional comments, as Frederick just stated, you know, it was a free response section, and the questions, the 91 questions were a little bit more directed or specifics. There were questions that we pulled from other tools. So, and many of them, yeah, they seemed redundant, but that was also the intent to try to get a trend from the same kind of question of the respondents. And I think we commented on that earlier. Yeah, so you know, so didn't I answer this one before? Well, we don't want you to search back and see what your answers were. We want you to answer it again and see if those were the same answers. Are you thinking the same way, or is there some confusion in the process? And that's never gonna come out directly, but it comes out in the averages. And the 91 questions, I think, you can put those down.
Okay, before you go on, we've got a couple questions. Hands up.
Oh.
Ingrid, vote right?
I have a comment. I just wanted to say, I think that this data, this free response data, is really hard to quantify. It's hard to assess. And I just want to say, I think, Tricia, I didn't realize you had done this. I think you did an absolute A+ job. Reading this, it really gave me a sense of the board. It was easy to understand, love the word clouds, you know, and so I know that that's a really difficult task. And as a new board member, I felt it was very informative.
I also wanted to compliment you on it. It was excellent the way you put it together. And I thought, yes, as Ingrid just stated, these are hard to, you know, draw conclusions from, but once again, themes came through as you did in your word jumble. And when I first looked at the evaluation before completing it, I really thought that probably this free response would be the most helpful to us. But that may not be the case, given but we're going to have the number analysis now. Go ahead, Mel.
Free responses are a lot more important because it is direct response to questions. This is like a total analysis of what we thought overall. So, and it is to be read that way when we get the answers. So, for each of 91 questions, we had 5 possible responses from 11 board members. So 2 board members selected not to answer any of the questions. So that led to 180 questions, 182 questions not being responded to at all. So we just threw those out of the possibilities. But again, the averages, we only figure the average response from the people who responded to the question 1 through 5. Which means if 5 people responded and we ended up with 10 points, then the average for that question is 2. That's how we figured out the average. And the intent was to see which questions, we all came to some kind of common agreement on. And the overall average that for all the questions ended up being like 3.5. But that is 3.5, which meant out of a scale of 1 to 5, 3.5 is like smack in the middle. We created a template, and I'm sure that template, you have it. It's in the package if you. Yeah, when I said template, I mean, yeah, rubric. And that rubric, from that rubric, we were trying to place the responses in terms of the total response, where we would consider if we ended up all together with a 1.8. Of course, that would be an effective vote. And went all from 2 to 3 needs improvement. And then you're very effective if you're from the 3-point category to 4, 3 to 4, and that's actually 60 to 80 if you talk in percent. And 4 to 5 is 80 to 100. Overall, we ended up with a 3.5 people. Many of our questions we responded to ended up being between the 4 and 5 category. And a few of them were less than 2. And after putting the 91 questions, and the new members not going to see those 91 questions because they're just too much of a volume. But board members had some serious thought about answering 91 questions, 1 through 5, and sitting there. But of course, they had more than one sitting, but being, the type of people we are, we want to get it done. So yeah, it was kind of taxing. I took 3 times. I divided mine into 3 sections, 30 questions and 30 questions. Then 30 questions. I went back. But we took those 91 questions, got averages for each question. And what I had done prior to developing the averages is I categorized the questions into certain performances that the expectations of an effective board, according to those responses we got from board members. And management was one of the categories. From management, we broke management into 3 different components. One was policies, the other was resource management, how we spend the dollars, and the other was how we present the style during the public meeting. And you see the graphs there of the questions that we placed in those categories. Now, a few questions, what's called double up, they ended up in more than one category. But examples, go back to management, the first one, policies. Question number 11, was on policies. And so it was 13, 14, you see the numbers underneath the graph there, right? Everybody with this? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see the numbers with the graph. So there are only a couple of them that dipped fairly low. Only question number 75, I think, was at 2.7 category, right?
Yes, 73.
73.
I said 3, yeah, okay. 73. So we want to look at what question number 73 was. We have to go back to that 91 question to see what 73 was. What did every board member, at least we had a common theme that day. We're not doing that exactly the way we want to get it done. Got it?
Would you like me to read it?
Yeah, because I can't see.
Okay, the board adopted a policy on parent and public relations involvement, which it referenced and reviewed.
They don't know what the question means in terms of what they do. So that's the part of why I was let down. We developed that public policy. It's not evident, obviously, that we're doing it. So, that's still close to average, go 2.7. But there are a couple of them that dip below 2 as we go along. And the next area, they're public meetings. You see public meetings? Yeah, there's one that goes down to what? 1.8. Number 3.
Board meetings were run efficiently.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just talked to a degree about an example. An hour on a $15,000 conversation. We got, 50,000 managed. And we have to present it in a 2-3 hour scope to the public. So that was an example. I think that's the thinking a lot of us have, but we're all guilty. So we have to figure out a way to get it done, to make that change. And Molly, go to the next, let's stay right there, Molly, public meeting. The next highest there was number 4, right? Next lowest.
And that question was, board members engaged in productive discussion on agenda topics. Touched upon.
Which, yeah, I mean, we know what the meetings are like, so that's not, most of those questions, and in our public meeting sessions, got very high ratings. That means that we are doing some things right during the public meetings, and I'm sure those of you who were on the board for years can see that, I think there has been an improvement in where we're trying to go in terms of our board meetings. So that's, sure, if you did this same question 15 years ago, the answers would be a lot less positive. All right, let's move to the next major topic there. Superintendent, that's relationships, right? Board relationship, it doesn't have that there, but that's what it was supposed to be. Board relationship. One, the superintendent and the board, the other, the community and the board, I believe, and then one board members with the board, member of the board, fellow member with the board. Everybody see the 3 charts? It's all on how the board relates, and the superintendent got high, the board superintendent relationship got high marks. Only the lowest mark was 2.9. 2.9.
75,
Question 75.
or withstood the pressure of special interest groups.
Okay. Yeah. That's a good one. That's a one that we gotta think about and consider. Yeah. And the community and the board, one question that stuck out there was question number 58. 2.2, which stated what?
The board handled conflict openly and constructively. Maybe openly.
Well, 2.2, well, that's why I got the 2.2, And, everything here is reflected too of the individual style of the teacher or the board member. Some people grade hard, and some people are a lot more lenient. So that's another thought process as we try to make it better. All right, the last one is fellow member and board. And how we treat the fellow members, and one got 1.9. That's probably the lowest out of, or I can be at a 1.8 something like that. 1.9.
And that's question 57,
Yeah.
which was the board provided biographical information about its members.
That's another point that we brought up. You know, our skill base ought to be elevated so that we understand who have the experiences to maximize our total production. That's my thought about that question and the response. If you grow apples, tell us how to grow apples. Basically, if you don't, then don't attempt to tell us. You know, listen and learn how it's done. You know? All right, grow professionalism and development. I think we're pretty good at that. Participate. Number 8 is the lowest one there.
Number 8, board members' model behavior commonly accepted for elected officials.
Low bar.
Yeah.
That was generous answer. Anyway, it still was a low bar.
Yeah.
We got to think about that as we go forward. That was a low bar of all the questions relative to more professionalism and development. Maybe we missed some questions that should have been in there, but all of the questions we selected, that was the low bar. And you can look at the other questions that we selected and see, do they match with, you know, board member professionalism. That's what I tried to do, map them in the right section. Okay. All right. Strategies for goal-related results. This one, I didn't really have a focus on this one until the scrimmagers suggested that we really focus on that, on this one. Now, the question, most of those questions are already in there. I have a focus on the goal, our results being part of what we were looking for. You see some of the questions there, you see a very low bar. That one is number
Achievement gap.
86, yeah.
86, that's achievement gap.
Yes, the question read,
Yeah.
the board eliminated achievement gaps between students at all grade levels and of all ethnic, racial, gender, disability, and socioeconomic groups.
So that matches what Tricia presented to us in her presentation. So, you know, those are some of the graphs there on the other questions. We also had some other graphs that we're not showing, but they also showed the average board member score, which we decided not to do that in the previous board meeting. How it matched with each of these categories too. But that's about the summation of the presentation. We try to show you questions, how the questions were responded to, and most of them are responded. Most folks answered all the questions. If you didn't answer all of them, then we just divided it by how many people answered that question to get those averages. Okay, so are there any questions on what we have? Okay.
Dr. Wisniewski?
Okay.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I just had 2 quick questions. The first one was in regard to that question number 73, because it specifically references a policy. So my question is kind of just a discussion question for the board of whether or not they would like the policy committee to, I mean, I believe we do have somewhat of a policy, but maybe it needs to be looked at again. So I guess that would be my first question. And then my other question is a general one for those questions where they were scored the least positive. Is there going to be a discussion of whether or not the ad hoc self-evaluation committee would be looking at those questions to particularly be revamped or expanded for future board evaluations? So I'm just kind of looking for some feedback from fellow board members on those two.
The first one, I mean, you can answer that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a sheet usually with me and I don't have it tonight. That's got the school district's, mission and vision, and then it's got like about 10 things that we strive for. And I believe parent, public relations involvement is on that, but I really would have to pull it back out. So I do think we have something in place. I don't have it at the tip of my tongue, let me just say that.
Right.
The second question, that you have, Dr. Wisniewski, is also very good. What are we going to do with this information? Especially what are we going to do with, you specifically asked, with the low scores. So I did continue the ad hoc board self-evaluation committee because I knew we were going to, discuss the results from what we did last year. And as already mentioned, one of the board members that left was on the committee. So the committee now is with Mr. Campbell continuing as the chair, Patricia Fidrich and David Strivinger. So we can have a discussion tonight, it's fine. I also was thinking we can sort of think over what we've heard tonight and come up with some ideas and maybe bring those forward at the next board meeting. We are going to have a report by Mr. Campbell under committee reports for what we're doing tonight. That would be another option. Let's have I'll let the other people that wanted to say something speak, and then we can go from there. Mr. Geyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, my compliments. I was a little skeptical about 91 questions and what we were going to get out of it. But the way you depicted this really hits me. I really like this. And I understand that we need to, especially in the low rating items, we need to really have a good discussion on how we're going to improve, because this, I believe, I wouldn't change a thing going forward. I think you got a baseline. This is a baseline for us. And if you change the questions, you change the baseline. And you can't really tell if you've improved or not. So my compliments, and I think this is really a work session kind of thing, because there's some really good meat in here that we should be looking at and saying, okay, let's get off the dime. How are we going to fix this achievement gap? Let's not talk what we want to. How are we going to? And that's a big conversation. But again, absolute superb product. Thank you.
Ingrid Boatwright.
Thank you. So I have two sort of comments. One is, I think Mr. Campbell's definitely identified areas where basically we're saying, in schools terms, we're failing, right? If we're below a 2 or a 2.5 on a 5.0 scale, that's an F, folks. And so I think that those are sort of mission critical areas to look at. But the other thing, as a new board member, that I am still trying to kind of wrap my head around is some of these questions, and I think we need to identify some of these questions aren't necessarily things we are in charge of. Like there's a couple things where it was very operational and it had more to do. I think we really need to focus on things that are policy driven, like Dr. Wisniewski pointed out, and look at what sort of policy, because I can't remember which one it was. It had to do with the achievement gap, but it was sort of like, did we eliminate the achievement gap? in my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm new, we come up with the policies of the achievement gap, but we're not actually responsible for the implementation of the policies on achievement gap. Or like, I think that's a distinction that we need to look at with some of these questions to focus on the ones that we have governance over.
Sure, go right ahead.
Well, I agree with you in terms of the gist of that question, but the overall responsibility for achievement gap still lies on the board. So if the achievement gap, and I think this is why David wanted some of this results in there, some of the results-oriented questions in there, because if the achievement gap is not gotten because we directed it, but it wasn't accomplished, then we have to look at what we directed in terms of, are we supporting it the right way, or is it just not being done? And it's still our responsibility to do that. Because ultimately, if the superintendent failed, we failed. And yeah, our first corrective measure may be get rid of the superintendent. Our corrective measure should probably be, let's look and see what he has designed and what we agreed about their design. So it's not, you understand, the buck stops here regardless. And that question, I think, was supposed to, be directed at us more so than what the superintendent is doing. I don't know whether they use the word ensuring or not. Are we ensuring that things are happening with the achievement gap?
And can I respond real quick?
Sure.
So I agree with that 100%. But I'm saying what I think we need to figure out how we focus on that is how we focus on the policy aspect of it as opposed to the operational. And I think, so not that we should disregard any of the questions. I looked through all these questions. I mean, they're all questions we should be asking, but I think some of them we have to look at in terms of how that affects. In fact, I think some of them, and the achievement gap is probably a bad one to point out because that was like our number one priority. I mean, clearly, I think everybody in this room wants to solve the achievement gap. I think it's divided into parts like what is the board's responsibility in solving the achievement gap and what is the teachers and the superintendent, just so that I don't want to see, and this again is new, as I understand it, I don't want to pull into this whole discussion evaluations of things that are not really things that we should be in our purview, right? So really focusing on things that we as the board are responsible for. But I mean, 100%, the goal of the board should be to eliminate or address the achievement gap. It's just how we get to that as we do this self-evaluation, how we grade ourselves.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what I think Colonel Geyer mentioned. We need to look at it and see what our role is in this, and are we accomplishing our role? And we do have certain responsibilities, even if it's just to focus the budget a little bit differently.
Exactly.
There are certain things that, and this is all a board self-evaluation. So we're not looking at anything that anybody else is doing except what we're doing with them. Even the superintendent board relationship, that's on us in this case. How we're relating to the superintendent, not necessarily how he's relating to us. Because everything on this template, I think it was designed, I think we vetted those questions carefully to make sure that, it could be our responsibility, it should be our responsibility, the answering of it and the looking at it in terms of corrective measures.
That's it, exactly.
So I agree. And I do agree with you in terms of the policies too. I think all of it boils down to what we state in policies and, and operations in terms of, expectations, agreeing or disagreeing with the expectations, managing from our standpoint. I agree with that. And, a lot of those questions are, somebody said not change, somebody said not change them. A lot of those questions, we can, if you want to, when we look at them, instead of having three on the same thing, have one. But the reason I did that this time is to make sure that there wasn't no our preconceived sentiments. You know, as we go forward, there are improvements that can be made to this instrument.
So I wanted to echo Dick Geyer's comments to you. I was pessimistic when I saw those 91 questions, and I thought, oh, as I already mentioned, I really thought the free response would be the useful part. But you've done an excellent job now and your committee on putting this all together, and then also sorting out what does it mean by dividing it into the different areas. It's, I think, you know, probably it's no surprise to most of us as to what came up on the low side.
Yeah.
But now, you know, how can we use that information and improve ourselves as a board? When I first saw the questions, and I still think this to some degree, that perhaps the questions have to be more aimed at an individual, because a good example would be, board members come prepared to the meetings. Well, it's very obvious when someone's not prepared, no question, it's obvious. But we really don't know, you know, there's a lot of gray area in between being very prepared and unprepared. And maybe I think this is what I was thinking, and I don't know if this is right or whatever, is to have the questions aimed really more at an individual answering. I come to the board meetings well prepared. Now, somebody's got to be brutally honest with themselves about whether they do that or not. But if the questions are aimed at individual behavior on how that relates to improving the function of the board, I think that would be really helpful. But I think you did a great job. And if you don't want to change a thing, I'm fine with this, and we'll do it again this way next year. As Mr. Geyer said, we've got a baseline now.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, because this was obviously a lot of work, and I know you guys met a lot of times.
You want to comment on that in terms of, because we did have a large portion of our resource was in that format, Tina. I, as a board member, do this, and for the most part, we changed the language. So that it didn't say I, also than board members. You know, very basically, so we could kind of self-govern as a governing group as opposed to individual government. But your point is well taken in terms of maybe some of the questions, and that could be a section, you know, that people, you know, really looking internally at themselves. And that requires, like you said, a certain amount of honesty with people. Supposed to be professionals, and I expect it's
Perhaps a section.
what's called tolerance. I expect a certain tolerance when you have an honest question too. Somebody's gonna lie, but for the most part, you're gonna tell the truth. So it's just like measuring needs, you know. Some people just went through it. Give it a 4. 2. And then some people really thought about it. So, you know, that's the kind of tolerance you're gonna have. But I'm not surprised with the outcome. I looked at most of those questions that dipped, and I agree that they were right. They dipped appropriately, and our high marks were you know, fairly complimentary of what we thought of ourselves, and that's good. And we can look at it again. The more we do it, the more we tend to hate those low marks. And it's like the grades, like Andrew said. I don't want a lousy grade on my report card.
So I think the challenge is going to be to keep those areas that need improvement, to kind of keep them front and center. Like, you know, so we have to keep reminding ourselves, what were the areas that needed improvement, and how do we just stay cognizant of that in our, in the board meetings and in what we do, so that we can show some improvement next time, that we do grade ourselves.
So, to put you back to work, and looking at those low questions and see what are commonalities perhaps, and maybe we'll start on a key focus first. And that achievement gap is big, but there may be some other common themes there that we can look at as a, you know, as a group discussion or group policy change, something, you know, of the sort.
And when I think of the individual questions, as I just mentioned, for the board member, for each board member to think about, I think of it in a way as what can I do as an individual to improve the greater good of the board and the district? And that's aiming the questions kind of like that, because that's really what, we all know what we're here for. And, yes, we have different styles, and yes, we have different backgrounds, and yes, we have different experiences, but we've got to use those in the best way we can, the most positive way we can, to improve the education for our students. Angela?
So I just have a comment. I appreciate this tool because this is a wonderful resource. Being self-reflection is brutal. It is very brutal. And when you're working towards being transparent and you want people to know, what you're doing and how you're thinking, this is a great way to do it. And you all have done a wonderful job. And thank you for being a newbie. This goes to show me that this board is moving in the right direction. And you're moving towards the goal of being more efficient. You're moving towards the goal of making sure that you have those strong ties within the community itself, with parents, with students, with people that don't have students, attending our schools. So this was great. Thank you for this piece. And I really enjoyed looking at, especially the comments in your word cloud. You called it something else. You called it Ingrid called it a word cloud. Yeah. I like that because those words stood out and that makes you think, okay, these are the practices, engagement. We need to work on engagement. There's a lack in certain areas. We need to improve those areas that lack. So thank you for doing it. You all did it.
I'm going to jump to Earl because he's been quiet all meeting. Earl Campbell. Earl, you're muted.
Yeah. Yes, I would like to say that at first when I look at all the 91 comments, I had some issues, but I think as far as our weaknesses, I think you will see a lot of improvement because some of the things that happened in the past, you won't see happening in the future. So Mel, I want to thank you and your committee for doing a good job, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Guy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make an observation. I was a member of the school board before. I was appointed. There was 5 members of the school board. We were appointed to the position based on where we lived, really. But we only had 3 schools. We had an elementary school, middle school, and a high school. And now we have 33 schools. And the way I look at it, and this is a personal opinion, is I pay a lot of attention to the 3 schools in my district and 1 school where most of my constituents go, and that's Battery Creek High School. It's not actually in my district, but most of my constituents go to Battery Creek High School. So I've made it my kind of personal thing to make sure that I'm really involved in those schools as far as observing. Go to the SIC meetings, I meet with principals, and just how's it going? Can I do anything for you? And of course, talk to constituents about the schools. But I can't have that level of knowledge of the other 30 schools in this district. And so I trust the board members. For example, last year, when we were having a discussion about school start times, and it was a real big issue in the Bluffton area. It's not an issue up here. I didn't have anything to say about that, other than the representatives from that district, if they say to do this, I'm for it. I trust everybody that they know their district and they know their schools. Now, I try to be aware of other schools, what's going on as well, of course. But I really look to the district representative. And if what you say that this is where we got to go, you're going to get my vote. And I hope that can be reciprocated. And that would help a lot because we spend a lot of time talking about things by board members questioning things that are going on in, say, Hilton Head. Well, I don't question it unless it's, a big financial thing that's going to affect everybody. But as far as, community involvement and everything else, that's somebody else's expertise, and I'm going to listen to them. And if we could all do that, that's going to help a lot by trusting fellow board members. That they know what they're talking about, they can talk to the constituents, it affects them, and we go from there. That's just an observation between being in a small school district and being in a large school. Thank you.
Kathy Robine?
Yes, I don't know. I've heard some ideas about how we move forward. I just had a thought that if we take this and look at our areas that need improvement, identify 4 or 5 areas with our lowest scores, and kind of identify it, then I think as a personal board member, I would sit back and say, what am I going to do differently? I'd come up with a personal plan myself to say, how am I going to support what the board has come up with to improve this function of the board. It's just, I think Ms. Middleton talked about personal responsibility and personal reflection. What Colonel Geyer just talked about, I think it all ties together. So if we came up with, 4 or 5, however many of the lowest scores that we wanted to tackle as a board, and then perhaps each of us individually could just reflect on those and say, you know what, this is what I can do to help with that. That was just my thought.
I'm going to ask Dr. Rodriguez, and since he's been, I know, on this meeting via the phone, so not by video. You've heard our discussion, Dr. Rodriguez, and you're the superintendent, and we have a board superintendent relationship, and I was wondering if you would like to make any comments.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, 1 second. Let me step over to the side.
Of course.
Okay, so just listening and observing the dialogue and the conversation. It was a little, because I'm working off of my phone, it was a little difficult to see all of the graphs and the charts, but I could follow the dialogue along. And I think one of the things, first of all, it's great to see the dialogue and the discussion that the board is having, because I believe strongly in a journey of continuous improvement, not only for myself but for our system as a whole. And I think that's really what you all are doing through this exercise and through this self-evaluation, is trying to be reflective and trying to zero in on opportunities to continue to improve. And so personally, I think that's outstanding. It's tremendous leadership, and I think it's fantastic. So I applaud really the efforts that the board is going through, and not just being reflective about that, but also thinking about the next step, right? Because that's always what we all do in that continuous improvement process, which is try to identify areas, but then think about next steps and possibilities and how to tackle that. And if I'm thinking about your dialogue in the last couple of minutes, you sort of shifted your discussion from that analysis to sort of a what's next conversation, which is how do we take the next step to become even better. And so that's really what I've been hearing as I listen to your dialogue and your discussion today. And it's just exciting. I think we're at a great opportunity and an exciting moment in time really to think about the journey forward, and to think about how every step we take is a step to improve ourselves so that we can improve outcomes for kids. So just appreciative of the dialogue that you all are having.
Mr. Melville?
So, Madam Chair, I guess it's incumbent on your behalf to give the new ad hoc self-evaluation committee an assignment.
Okay, so it seems like from our dialogue tonight, that we all think a work session, would be good at our next work session to really try to go deeper into the areas that we think we need to work on and how we would tackle those. I believe Ms. Boatright was giving a good example with the achievement gap. What's our responsibility? What's the superintendent's responsibility? And in turn, what will he feel is the teacher's responsibility, and so on and so forth. So we have to, I guess maybe and I'd love input from you guys, but perhaps we've got the committee assigned for going forward. You guys heard what our discussion was. Do you want to come back to the board? Doesn't have to be by next Tuesday, because I don't think that's probably reasonable, with a recommendation on some of the things that we already talked about. You could come back with a new scope, or you're going to revise the instrument a little bit, or no, you're not going to revise the instrument, you're not going to recommend that. We definitely need the work session, but that's kind of separate to get into the details. And I guess those are kind of really the main things is, are we going to change the instrument? No, we're not. And then where's our discussion going to lead us for improvement for educating our children? Does anybody else want to comment? How about you, Mr. Campbell? You're leading.
I'd just like to thank everybody that supported us, and you all did your yeoman's task of answering the questions. Look forward to next year. You have to answer those questions again. But I going forward, we'll meet and decide where we go from here in terms of our directions, our suggested directions. And like to thank Robin and Molly for their support and helping us put this together. And also Mr. Fowler, Mr. Daniel Fowler, for helping us analyze where we need to go with it. It's a team effort. Tricia showed, her skills. I piggyback along. Thank you very much.
Mr. Campbell, you had the vision all along. You had it all along, so thank you for that.
All right, Ingrid Boatright.
Oh, I was just going to follow up on what Dr. Rodriguez and say as a new board member. I think that so rare that you go to a self-evaluation too and come out like kind of excited, but I do feel like, okay, we kind of have a roadmap, and that it's an exciting point in time, and I'm looking forward to working on this board. And I think that overall the scores were good and we understand the problems. And so I think that the focus of the ad hoc self-evaluation committee now is, okay, let's fix the things we need to fix and start making a lot of forward progress. So I'm just wanted to say I was excited too.
Do we have anybody else that would like to add anything to tonight's discussion, or? All right, do we have a motion to adjourn? Again, Mr. Mel Campbell and Ms. Tricia Fitch seconds the motion to adjourn. And thank you, everybody. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We're now adjourned. Thank you and good night.